And we're live.
Hello, Ericka.
Hello,
Good
Robert. Good.
Nice to be live with you again.
Yes, here we are on a special Monday edition of the People.
Because the DNC has their first day, and we couldn't miss all the activities. But before we get, you can't make this up. Before we get to that, my latest outrage.
Tell me.
Under the heading of contrived campaigns, right? It's one thing to have Biden in the basement all the time, which I think they're going to do with Kamala, however we pronounce it.
Yeah, whatever way is not racist.
So the Harris campaign just got busted editing the headlines of already friendly outlets, right? Team is editing news headlines, adding in her favor without the outlets knowing. So you want to talk about being in the tank?
Wild.
Right?
Wild.
And they just got busted and they said, oh, we're sorry.
Yeah. Who's suing them? Somebody's suing them.
That one, I don't know.
Yeah. Some outlet that it's like, I don't think it's Reuters, but it's somebody that's not totally unknown is suing them.
It's either the Guardian or the Pittsburgh Gazette, actually. I think it's the Guardian. I think it's the Guardian.
Yeah. I don't, you guys fact check us, put it in the comments, but it's so bad that a friendly outlet, again, not a bunch of right wingers, are actually suing the campaign for faking their headlines.
Well, editing their headlines without their knowledge. I mean, how bad is it? CNN and everyone else is already in the tank for the Harris campaign. You've got to edit their headlines.
Yeah.
So
wild.
Here's one of the things that they said, right? It's like one of the headlines in Guardian, Reuters, CBS, all that. Harris will lower health costs. Quote, Kamala Harris will lower the cost of high quality, affordable care. And that was on Axios. And then they say paid for in little, doesn't matter. Excuse me. Lies, and damn lies, right? What happens is in the small print, it says paid for by a Harris campaign. The point is that they're taking an already friendly press and they're trying to put it on steroids. And, don't get me started because believe it or not, guess what the monologue's about. So let's rock and roll.
Ooh, okay. Here we go.
Hello, and welcome to Of the People, the Kamala coronation. Today is the first day of the DNC convention, and DNC, not to be confused with a DNC, the medical procedure that some women happen to go through. Of course, when you think about it, the DNC could probably use a good scraping to get rid of those abnormal cells that are in the DNC, like Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and now Governor Tim Walz in all of this. But maybe if you get rid of those abnormal cells, they would actually try to put America's needs first and stop trying since 2008 to fundamentally transform America, which has been going on since Obama got elected. But back to the Kamala coronation. And the real question is it a coronation or is it a coup? And potentially, is it both? Let's remember they put Joe Biden out there to debate Donald Trump before the convention and before the primaries were over. That's never been done before. So maybe this was intentional, but a coronation is when you bestow on someone sort of, a monarch, right? Their title and their power and all of this. So you have to ask yourself whether or not this was planned, because when you look at the facts, go to Kamala Harris's campaign appearances. Is there one campaign appearance that she's appeared at that there was more than a couple hundred people in all of this? Let's not forget the only primary debate performance she had in 2020 was she was roasted by Tulsi Gabbard, and deservedly so in all of this. And let's be candid. When Joe Biden was no longer useful to the Democratic power brokers or the Democratic structure, they summarily got rid of him and they installed Kamala Harris, who has never had to face the voters on a national level. And please do not tell me, well, she was the vice president on the Biden-Harris ticket. These are the same people who want you to believe that Joe Biden, hiding in his basement, got 81 million votes. If you believe that, there's beachfront property, there's oceanfront property in Arkansas that I'd like to sell you. Just not possible. So you have to wonder, is this a coup or is this a coronation? My guess is that the campaign goes on, they're going to limit her access even more than they did Joe Biden. They're going to maybe have her try to do one debate and hope that she scrapes by and doesn't do harm to herself, albeit with a friendly host, of course. And then they're going to miraculously end up with 81 million votes again, is my guess in this whole process. One thing's for sure. If Donald Trump was the best friend or best American president, friend to Israel that America has ever had, a President Kamala Harris will be the best friend that Hamas ever had. And do not let the protests, which we'll talk about, that are going on in Chicago at the DNC fool you. She is no friend to Israel. We talked months and months ago that Joe Biden would not be the nominee for president for the Democrats. We were right. You mark my words on this one. And that's the monologue. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm thrilled for the main part of the show to have joining us Daniel Flesch, visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, former spokesperson for not one but two Israeli ambassadors to the United Nations, former IDF paratrooper, incredible knowledge, incredible public figure, and has taken time out of his day to come join us. I also have to be honest, he is going to be one of our key speakers at Israel Appreciation Day in September. We are thrilled to have you with us. Daniel, thank you for joining Of the People.
It's a pleasure to be here. Glad to partake in this conversation.
Absolutely. So
hold on. I gotta just start. I don't remember reading the paratrooper part. I obviously missed that. So now I know everything I need to know about you now, Daniel. You are like gonna be a badass. I got it now. Okay. Now we can continue on with all the rest of the questions.
Well, you see, he, this is sort of like Clark Kent and Superman. He looks like this mild-mannered guy, but anybody who's a paratrooper jumping out of airplanes, there's, I know we're building you up, right? But I mean, that takes guts to jump out of an airplane. As a friend of mine once said, Daniel, why would you want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane?
Indeed, that's the same thing my mother asked me when I told her not only did I get into the IDF, but I wanted to join the paratrooper. She said, "Why would you want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane? And moreover, aren't you afraid of heights?"
Oh,
you're afraid of heights?
Interesting. All right, conquering.
Let me say, I have a comfortable unease with tall places and peering over ledges and such. But beyond that, in short, for me, to join the paratrooper, you get inducted or really drafted into the IDF, and then if you go through a volunteer process to try out for the paratroopers. So it's not something they conscript you and you go into it. You actually have to volunteer to enlist in it. And I viewed it as a way to be the ultimate soldier, do as much different capabilities as you can while in the IDF, and was fortunate enough to be selected and then jumped out of planes.
Wow. Amazing. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I derailed your conversation there, Robert.
No. So let me ask you, military service in Israel is compulsory. Military service in this country used to be compulsory, and don't quote me on the year, until 1972 or whatever. What's your perspective on how that makes a difference to sort of sense of nation state or sort of, patriotism or bonding with, one's country? I mean, can you talk a little bit about the difference? Because it's so different here. And I think that makes a huge difference, at least according to me.
Question.
Yeah, let me just say from the outset, I do not favor a national conscription in the United States. The Selective Service Act, certainly, and we all have to sign up for, at least males, but in terms of national conscription, which is different, I would separate than national service. But a conscription, I'm not in favor of in the United States. Just because Israel's doing it does not mean it works for the United States. And Israel does it mainly because it needs to. It has to. It cannot rely as a small country on a volunteer force, which would make up an even smaller percentage of the population to fight its wars. And this was from day one in 1948 when Israel was established in 1948. It is a citizens' army. On the flip side, here in the United States, we don't need that. We don't face the same kind of immediate threats that Israel faces, particularly on its borders in the region. I mean, Mexico and Canada aren't mounting some sort of invasion of our borders anytime soon. But one thing it does do, and this is why in many ways I'm in favor of a national service, but not national military conscription, is because, Rob, to your point, you serve with people from all over the country. And in many ways, and I'm an American who serves, so people served from people outside the country. But my service, my unit in particular, was incidentally very unique. Many people don't know or don't realize how pluralistic of a society Israel is. In my squad alone, particularly during training, I served with certainly Jews, both religious Jews, observant Orthodox Jews, and secular non-religious Jews. I served with Muslims. I served with Christians. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Hezbollah launched an attack on a Druze town in the northern part of the Golan Heights in Israel, killed tragically 12 Druze children. I just want to say I had more Druze commanders than I did Jewish commanders through much of my service. So one thing that national service does do is brings all these disparate parts of a society together to see each other as certainly as equals, but also as parts of a broader and collective whole for which a mission that you are working towards together. And the military certainly does that. And although there's a universal conscription in Israel, not everyone does serve in the military. There's different carve-outs for various reasons. People can do a national service and not a national military service. So there are pros and cons, but there's no doubt that one way to form a cohesive society that also realizes the broader objective of the national ambition is to have some sort of place or area or service where people are gathering together to achieve that goal. Yeah.
And distinguish for us the difference between national conscription and national service, because I don't think in America we understand the difference. We just assume that the draft is you got to serve 2 years in the military. Are you talking about things in this country that would be like the Peace Corps and other things? What's national? Distinguish the two.
Yes. So really, I'm coming from the Israeli perspective. There's something called the Shirut Leumi, which is Hebrew for national service, which is not joining the IDF. It is doing something like, it's not the same, but like Teach for America or like AmeriCorps, which is the domestic version of Peace Corps.
Okay.
And there's also conscientious objectors. There's religious exemptions, which is a big thing politically in Israel right now. But by and large, what I'm trying to distinguish is if you want to serve your country, there's more ways to do it than picking up a gun, than being in uniform. And while Israel compels you to serve your country, it says, for most of you, you're going to do it in uniform. But for others of you, a small percentage, you can do it somewhere else. So what I'm saying is from the American perspective is the holistic idea of serving your country in some capacity, particularly after high school, late teens, early 20s, that time period, I think is something we should really consider here in the United States. But I'm not advocating to go back to the Vietnam War era, even before, of a national conscription. But I think to get our younger generations more engaged in understanding A, of America, and B, of each other in America, it can go a long way to having some sort of service that people have to do, whether it is, Rob, as you mentioned, Peace Corps or AmeriCorps or Teach for America as a private organization, but something like that could be helpful.
I love that you said that, because one of the best things I ever did in my life was move to Texas. I joke that, I'm from the Northeast, I'm from Vermont. It is true that Yankees are a bunch of snobs. Okay. It's true. We think we're better than everybody else. We won the war. Okay. Yeah, we're like that. And so when I was going to move to Texas, I was like, oh, they're all racists and rednecks, because that's what the media told me. And then I got here and I was like, these are the freaking nicest people I've ever met. Right. Oh man, why am I so mad all the time? Maybe I could be a little nicer, And it's just, we don't know each other. We really don't.
Right. And this is particularly, could be a whole other conversation. We're kind of derailing, I think, the plan you had already for this conversation. But just to say,
no, that's fine.
Particularly in an era where we are atomized through social media, what better way to get people together, getting younger generations, than seeing each other standing side by side on the front lines or in a classroom or helping build a house in some impoverished community? I think that could go a long way to build social cohesion.
Yeah.
And look, you're not derailing any conversation. This is really what we want to talk about, because part of what we always talk about is, as much as we acknowledge what we call the 3Ds, the demonize, demagogue, demonize, and divide, which I think is a political strategy, right? If you separate Americans from each other, men from women, rich from poor, black from white, find a social fissure that is not being exacerbated. On the other hand, we reject a divided America. Right. Yeah. We believe in one America. We believe in one people. The question is to paraphrase, right? How do you put Humpty Dumpty back together again?
Yes.
National service as opposed to a national conscription, because that's all people in this country really, those who recall it at all, recall it as a draft, right? You're going to be drafted into the army, and who went to Canada and who served honor, all those kinds of things. So no, you're not differentiating at all. But I want to jump back to Israel, because what's the mood in Israel? I mean, I know, again, taking off on what Ericka said, I know what the media is telling me, yet I have hundreds of friends in Israel. I have people who go back and forth, and what I'm hearing from them on the ground is not what is being portrayed in the media in terms of the solidarity. It doesn't mean that Israelis don't have their differences. It doesn't mean, the left is the left, the right is the right. And I mean, I get all that, but what do you see on the ground there? What are you hearing in terms of, since October 7th?
Well, there's an adage in the Jewish community, which is 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So imagine a country of 7 million Jews, how many different opinions you're going to have there. And there's 10 million people overall in Israel. The moment right now, let me start now and then back up. The moment right now is one of many people are in suspense. Immediately, Hezbollah and Iran are warning or indicating that they're going to be attacking Israel, which Israel is looking at the potential of a much broader regional war. And I don't want to be under any false pretense. Israel has been at war with the region, can specify who, since October. And frankly, even before that, because the reason there is no peace predominantly with much of Israel's neighbors is simply because there was no peace treaty in 1949 when Israel finally established its borders in its War of Independence. So Israel's been at war with most of its Arab neighbors for the better part of 7 decades. But since October, Israelis kind of realize their predicament in the region, the precariousness with which they find themselves in the region. And one of the reasons this war is being fought is because Israel's fighting most immediately for survival, and more broadly in the longer term for its survival in the region in the long run. And there's a few reasons for that. One is most immediately from the military threat. If Hamas can do what it did to Israelis on October 7th, what can Hezbollah do in the north in Lebanon? Hezbollah is a much more powerful enemy for Israel. Israel has viewed Hamas as a tactical threat that can be managed. Hezbollah to the north is a much more strategic threat that presents a existential threat to the state of Israel. And beyond that, Iran, which is Hezbollah's primary proxy, Iran has this ring of fire strategy through this network of proxies that surround Israel from the north onto the east, the south, and the west, and that wants to destroy Israel. So that's the immediate sense from a military perspective, but also more broadly, if we recall in 2020, the Abraham Accords were signed, and the Abraham Accords were peace agreements between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and eventually then Morocco came on board and a couple other countries. But a key predicate of those accords, for which we're hoping Saudi Arabia will make peace one day, it's not going to happen despite what people might tell you during this administration. It's just not going to happen, but hopefully in the next administration. The key predicate of that is that Israel can solve these Arab countries' primary military and other threats, mainly from Iran. And if Hamas can do to Israel what it did on October 7th and survive, then what good is the vaunted IDF for Saudi Arabia against the IRGC, against the Iranians? So longer term, Israel's fighting for its place in survival. So Israelis have a renewed sense of purpose in the region, a renewed sense of, frankly, Zionism, which is the Jewish right to self-determine in the land of Israel, in their ancient homeland. Because if Hamas can conduct what it did on October 7th again and again, then what purpose is the state of Israel, which can't protect its own citizens? And beyond that, one war we're not talking a whole lot about is the war in the north with Hezbollah. If there was no war in the south with Hamas and Gaza, we would be calling right now the engagement between Israel and Hezbollah the third Lebanon War, which has been happening since October 8th. Hamas attacked October 7th. Hezbollah joined in the next day on October 8th, in many ways to show solidarity, not with Hamas per se, but with, again, efforts to destroy Israel and to, again, also as an Iranian proxy, to show support for another Iranian proxy that's destroying Israel. So there's been a war there since October 8th. And right now, Israel's facing, getting back to the beginning, the prospect of a much broader engagement with Hezbollah, which is threatened to destroy Israel, also with the Iranians after Israel took out a Hamas leader in Tehran 2 weeks ago now.
Right. So let me jump in, Daniel, real quick, because you just put so much out there for our listeners to digest, which is great. You really, I mean, you have such a grasp of it. But a couple things. What I'm hearing from you, and if I am misstating, please correct me, that Israel, notwithstanding their differences, has come together by and large as a country because they understand the existential threat of not just the Hamas war, or the attacks from Hamas on October 7th, but the broader regional implications. Correct?
Yeah,
far?
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
And I want to caveat that real quickly and just say headlines will tell you something else. You said that in your earlier question.
Exactly. And that's one of the things, I mean, we'll do a whole show on my disdain for the journalists in this country and what passes for honest brokers of information.
Journalism.
But don't start me, Ericka. Do not start me on that. But there are no honest brokers. Edward R. Murrow would be is rolling over in his grave as far as I'm concerned. But I want to focus on what you brought up with Hezbollah, because Hezbollah on many levels has been called the wild card in this whole military conflict with Israel, because obviously they are the number one proxy for Iran. They have been receiving incredible amount of aid from Iran and weapons for, better part of a couple decades, as far as anyone knows, since the last real war. And yet, like you said, on October 7th, they started launching how many missiles into northern Israel, right, into the Golan and into northern Israel, and nobody seems to really notice. They go, oh, well, Hezbollah's not in this war. Yeah, they are. They've been in this since day one or day two, as the case may be. And I say to my people or my friends, I'm like, imagine, Montreal, Canada, launching how many hundreds of missiles into Vermont. How long are you going to take that? So talk a little bit about sort of the Hezbollah factor, because that really is, to me, the wild card. I mean, what I'm hearing is that Hezbollah is going to be engaged to try to sort of soften everything up before Iran decides if they're going to take a direct role in ground ops or otherwise in this. Can you speak a little towards that?
Yeah. So the main thing is no one really knows what's going to be happening. The ball effectively is in their court. It's not to say Israel won't be, and is currently conducting operations against Hezbollah and against the Iranians, both in Lebanon and also in Syria. We're seeing daily reporting of that. But it's important to mention, as we talked about, that Hezbollah started attacking Israel on October 8th. And people should be asking, why is that? It's not that, Israel attacked Hezbollah. There's been quiet since 2006, since the Second Lebanon War. Part of my service was spent on the Lebanese border, and it was the quietest border of any border Israel had for the past 16 years until October 8th. So right now, Hezbollah is facing a situation where they have a vast arsenal of rockets and missiles, about 200,000, which is about 5 to 7 times larger than Hamas had before this war. And they respond effectively entirely to the Iranians, to the Ayatollah Khamenei. And if he says, fire even 10% of your rockets or missiles or mortars against Israel, you're talking about 15 to 20,000 of these projectiles coming into Israel, for which Israel has no feasible response. Israel has the Iron Dome, which is really a short-range missile defense or rocket defense battery. It has other capabilities, but by and large, there's no country in the world, particularly Israel, that could defend against that kind of salvo from neighboring states. So that's why Hezbollah presents a strategic threat. And what Israelis are starting to realize is in a war with Hezbollah, I hate to say this, live and on recording, but it's true that if Israel engages a broader war with Hezbollah, then Israelis can expect a different skyline for Tel Aviv. And that's not a war that Israel's been accustomed to fighting since 2006 and really since ever. A lot of the war with Hezbollah was in the north, with wars with Hamas in the past have been the south, but Hezbollah now presents, because it's built up its arsenal the past 17 years by virtue of Iranian supply and training and support, it can target the entirety of Israel. So Israelis are facing a situation where they're waiting for orders. They actually got orders from the government to stock up on certain canned goods and other essentials in the event that the infrastructure or the power grid goes down, and that they have to wait out in bomb shelters for an extended period of time. They're still in this waiting period. And with every day that goes by, there's a running Israeli joke now that something else might happen or nothing might happen at all. In fact, Hassan Nasrallah, the the head of Hezbollah, about a week or so ago, tweeted out that, we might attack today, we might attack tomorrow, we might attack next week on Twitter. And to that, Israelis responded, oh, so it's the pizza delivery guy, or oh, so it's Israeli mail, or oh, it's when my ex whatever will get back to me, making jokes of this.
Wow.
And that's kind of the Israeli mindset. But last thing I'll say about the resilience of Israelis, and you mentioned, what would we do if Montreal was attacking the United States? For one thing, if you were in national service and you lived in Texas, you might not care what happens to the poor residents of Vermont if Montreal is attacking. But if you were serving with someone who's from Vermont, you might then care. And for Israelis, one thing I really appreciate when I serve and I tell people is when Hamas or Hezbollah rockets, even before October 7th, when they launch into Israel, they might not land on your home, but they land on your friend's home or your family's home, or you are 1 degree of separation away from someone's home that they're landing on. And those rockets, those projectiles, they do not distinguish between Jewish homes and non-Jewish homes. So Israelis are really in solidarity with this. There's obviously strong disagreements with the government on both sides of how they're handling hostage negotiations, how they're handling the war in the south, in the north, with Iran. And to be clear, Israel is fighting on 7 different battlefronts actively every day since October.
And that's why Israel Appreciation Day is so important, you guys. Check out this word from our sponsor.
Why Israel Appreciation Day? Because no one is telling the Israel story about why Israel's existence is so important, not just as a Jewish state and not just as an ally of the United States, but for all the positive achievements Israel has contributed to the world in science, technology, medicine, human rights, religious freedoms, rule of law, democracy, and so on. We need to start winning the public relations information war and change the narrative, especially among our younger generations. We need to get the information out there and arm those people who understand the seminal importance of Israel to the world. And being the Jewish homeland doesn't begin to tell that story of why Israel is so important. It's something we all can come together on, and honestly, it's something we all must come together on. It is imperative the general public understands the nature of the very special relationship between Israel and the United States and Israel's importance to the world. So please join us on September 18th as we celebrate Israel Appreciation Day. You'll also be able to find us live on all the streaming channels, including Roku, Apple TV, Dish Network, and others. Because never again is now. And never again really is now. And still staying with us is Daniel Flesch, visiting fellow at Heritage Foundation, among other accolades. And tune into the earlier part of the show because there's too many to list for Daniel. So Daniel, I want to come back to this perspective of Israel at war, because as I recall, the last Lebanon War, the United States and some allies actually got directly involved, or that might have been the first one, but I'm pretty sure it was the second one, where I think it was it the Fifth Fleet? I forget which fleet was there, but they were actually basically attacking Hezbollah from the ocean, from the water, right? Do you see the United States or the United Kingdom or any other allies coming to Israel's aid this time around if Hezbollah, in fact, I can't say launches a war because they've already launched a damn war, but I mean, if it becomes more aggressive and it escalates. Thank you. That's why, Ericka, you and I make such a good team. I start the sentence, you can finish it.
That's my job.
I don't see what's indicative, or perhaps hopefully illustrative, is in April what happened. In April, Iran launched the first ever direct strike from its territory onto Israel. When it launched over 300 UAVs and drones and missiles, both ballistic and cruise missiles, against Israel on the night of April 13th and 14th. In response, the U.S. and Israel, the U.S. led a regional network of allies and partners to shoot down most of those drones and missiles. You had the UK, the US, Israel, Jordanians, the Emiratis, the Saudis, I believe, as well. Don't quote me if I need to look back. Some offering offensive capabilities, actually having fighter planes in the air shooting down some of the drones, some offering radar installation capabilities, etc. I see something similar potentially happening against Hezbollah. The problem is the proximity. When Iran sits 1,300 kilometers or 1,500 kilometers from Israel, so things were taking literally hours to go from Iran to Israel. In fact, there was another kind of in Israel, people were getting the warning that Iran had launched a salvo against Israel, and people then were checking their clocks, like, when's this thing coming? We're waiting up here all night. What's going on? Because it takes a while for UAVs to cross that kind of distance. With Hezbollah, the rockets can come within a matter of minutes, maybe tens of minutes, if they're launched further north, deeper into Lebanon, and trying to travel further south into Israel. But it's a very short distance in time for anyone to respond with air and missile defense assets. So the opportunity for the US or the UK or anyone to do something in shooting down rockets and missiles is limited. But kind of what you're asking as well is, will the US take proactive steps and actually target Hezbollah?
Correct.
I think frankly, I don't think it's going to happen under this administration, because one thing they've been trying to do is de-escalate. Of course, their definition of de-escalate, or their pursuit of that policy, has only escalated the situation in the last 10 months, 11 months now. It's been very frustrating, frankly, to see and watch. And as Americans, we should call this out. You have a lot of Israelis who will look at what Biden did in a few weeks after October 7th. And it's very notable that he went to Israel. We should applaud him for that, for going to Israel and meeting with victims of the attacks. However, you can only go to Israel to deliver a bear hug in many ways, which is what he did. But since then, it's been a really atrocious record. And part of that has been trying to de-escalate, because they think they want to put pressure on Israel. That de-escalates the situation. Well, that really does is embolden Israel's enemies. And everyone should be aware, Israel's enemies are also the U.S.'s enemies. So to your question, no, I don't think the U.S. will do anything in the next few months because it's an election season, and you don't want to overtly start another regional war in the middle of an election year. And so we have 80 or so something days till November. So I don't see that happening. After the fact, might be a different story. Not with President Biden in the office. Maybe a change.
Yeah, they are so focused on winning the pro-Hamas vote in this country. I mean, Benjamin pulled up some of the protest pictures, and, I'm just like, when you learn now that a lot of these protests are not natural, these are not normal, regular Americans who are wearing Palestinian scarves. These are funded by foreign countries who hate us and are on the side of the terrorists.
Death to America, inside America.
Really, you guys, if I know that, and I'm just Erica down in Texas, you can't tell me that Kamala or Kamala, whichever one isn't racist, and Biden don't have the same information.
Yeah, but we also shouldn't underestimate, how many are just Americans going out there on their own volition. You're right that there's a lot of good work right now being done by some organizations in Washington, D.C. and outside to try to track the money and follow. It was I think it first became a national awareness where in Colombia, the people who are protesting and setting up tents on the quad there, all the tents look the same. They all look brand spanking new. They're all the same.
Amazing, isn't it? They all look the same. They bought them at the same store. Exactly.
And it's great. And so I don't know how these college students found that kind of funding, but clearly they did, right? But we should not, I do say this, we should not underestimate the fact that you do have a lot of Americans going out there to support what they believe to be, a righteous cause, perhaps. And obviously it's misguided, it's wrong. They're effectively supporting terrorists.
They're being misled.
So Daniel, you bring up an excellent point. So you are one of the keynote speakers at Israel Appreciation Day, which is really to try to educate the public, especially the youth, about what Israel is about, why it's important, not just as the Jewish state, as we say in the commercial, or the U.S. ally. So my question to you really is, and I want to get to Zionism in a second, because I know you've launched this whole initiative, Israel Educator, which I want to definitely talk about and have people be able to tune in. But you've agreed to be part of the show, the show that we're putting on TV. What do you hope Israel Appreciation Day accomplishes?
I hope it accomplishes two things, and hope you got more objectives. But for me, I'm looking at two things. One is to make a clear demonstration show support for Israel, which has been done numerous times in different venues, certainly, but this one promises to be a unique one, particularly at this moment when Israel needs it. and Israel needs to see it from the United States as well. And the second objective is the consensus of this message, the broad consensus you're looking to build, bipartisan, interfaith, et cetera, support in pursuit of that message and support of that message. So that's what I'm trying to see. I know a lot of speakers are coming from across the political spectrum, from different backgrounds. Correct. I think that's great. And I guess maybe the final thing is also that this is not a one-off event. This is a day of days, perhaps. And this is something that's going to have legs and really try to reshape and reframe the U.S. support for Israel and also Israeli awareness about Israel in the United States.
No, I appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about your new venture, Israel Educator.
Yes.
Right? And I want to see it through the lens of, let's talk about Zionism, because, I find it's funny. It's not funny, but it's comical is, I guess, a better word, when at the height of the protests on campuses, and I think they're coming back in September when kids return to campus, some people would go around and they would talk to the protesters and they would ask them, on recording, what does river to the sea mean? Why are you protesting? And most of them had no idea. I would also wager that if you ask them what Zionism is in any realistic term, they wouldn't know that either. So talk a little bit about what Zionism really is and why you founded Israel Educator as well, which I think is another important outreach as you grow that effort. And where can they find you and all that good stuff?
Certainly. So the Israel Educator is born out of a lot of my experiences and knowledge, not only serving on Israel's front lines, but also realizing the moment that we're in the last number of months that I've been doing speaking engagements across the country, I sometimes ask people, are you a Zionist? And the reaction falls into a couple different camps, particularly in the non-Jewish camp. People often say, Zionist, no, what is that? Or that's a Jewish thing. Clearly, I'm not Jewish, therefore I'm not a Zionist. Zionism is, in short, the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. It is, if you're a Zionist, you are someone who supports Jewish self-determination, or the right of the Jewish people to self-determine in their ancient homeland, which is the land of Israel. That's it. If you support that, then welcome aboard, my friends. You are a Zionist. And within that fairly effective definition encompasses a whole variety of political philosophies, beliefs, mantras, etc., that people from across the political spectrum can support and find reasons to support and to further as well. So in getting that reaction from people, I'm finding those who are supportive of Israel in the evangelical community, they lack the knowledge and the context and the language really about their support for Israel. And then more specifically in the Jewish community, I find a lot of people saying, well, what's happening in Israel and why do I know the history of this? And what can I do to teach my kids who are going off to college soon, knowing what they're going to face on campuses, the information they need to know? Because there's nothing worse than being confronted with a lot of these pro-Hamas supporters who are chanting horrific things, such as Israel's a genocidal state, Israel's an apartheid state, Israel's a colonial project. And if you're a pro-Israel student, Jewish or non, and you don't have the wherewithal, the context, the knowledge about the history, then I understand you're going to feel intimidated, not want to engage, but these people need to be engaged. So the Israel Educator is it's a program that I launched where I educate a variety of audiences, students, adults, parents, religious institutions, law enforcement, any organization, about the history of Israel, the Jewish people, and Zionism, and also their importance to Western civilization. Because one thing we're really starting to realize is the forces that are fighting against Israel are coming for the United States next.
That's right.
We often say first they come for the Saturday people, the Jews, and next they come for the Sunday people, the Christians. So that's really a big element of my project. You could find me at theisraeleducator.com. Reach out to me at daniel@theisraeleducator.com. I'd love to reach more audiences. I've got about 18 different courses that I teach in 90-minute segments. I can do it remote. I can come to you in person. Courses ranging on the history of Israel from Abraham to the present day, about the IDF, about a primer on anti-Semitism, more in-depth conversation about Zionism, about the U.S.-Israel relationship. Again, 18 courses online. Find them. I teach them live because I find the best way that people learn is to be spoken with, not to or at. So I have these very lively engagements where I ask questions and I want to know where people are at, where they're and meet them there so that they get the best educational experience and they themselves are empowered with the knowledge, not only about Israel, that's all well and good over there, but what it means for us as Americans over here as well.
I love that, Daniel, because I have to tell you just sincerely, and I've told Robert the same thing. There is a lot of stuff that has come up in the last 18 months that honestly I had never really had to think about. Uh, and people are saying wild stuff online, and I have questions that I'm afraid to ask in public or to anyone other than Robert, who like loves me and knows my heart. You know what I mean? Like, because if you ask these things, you're immediately called a this, a that, a whatever. And it's like, no, I have questions and I want to ask and I want to know these things. And it doesn't mean I'm mad or angry, but it's like this topic is so charged. It's so charged.
Yeah, and it is. And also, it's called an intractable conflict for a reason. Although, frankly, I mean, I'll bring some Judaism in here. There's an old adage where someone came across two rabbis and asked one, how do I learn the Torah? I'm standing on one leg, teach me the Torah. And one guy's like, you need years to learn the Torah. Another guy, Rabbi Hillel, said, don't do unto others what you don't have to do unto you. The rest is all gravy after that. And that's basically a pithy statement. So just to say, it's the most intractable conflict, but it's also the one easiest to solve, which I'll give you the secret ingredients. It is becoming a Zionist, because the Palestinians, there's no reason they can't become Zionists, because if they become Zionists, that means they support Jewish right to self-determination in the land of Israel. And what does that then cause them to think and do differently? We'll accept the right of the Jewish people to self-determine the land of Israel. And that's what this conflict is about. That's what Hamas demonstrated to Israelis, Jews, and the world, that they are anti-Zionists, because they do not recognize the right of Jews to live on that land and self-determine on that land. So, yeah, so there's right. So to your point, there's a lot of information out there. I try to package it in these very simple ways of understanding. Certainly tailor it for the audience. I'm speaking to a Jewish audience, be a little different speaking non-Jewish audience, because make sure everyone understands the message I'm trying to get across. But there's a lot out there, and you need to know that you're getting, good verifiable information.
Yep. Oh man, good verifiable information. Yeah. That's a commodity these days.
Well, truth is a commodity these days. I want to go back to a slightly different topic. You were the basically spokesperson at the United Nations for 2 Israeli ambassadors, correct?
Yes, I was senior advisor. Yeah.
Okay. I want to get your perspective, because we're not really big fans of the United Nations here. I'm sure that will not come as a surprise to you. And we're really not big fans of UNRA, amongst other UN agencies, for all the reasons I think, you would agree with. But how anti-Semitic, without putting you on the spot, how anti-Semitic is the UN? And is the UN, in your mind, filling any international positive purpose, as opposed to just being I've heard it referred to as sort of a den of, let's call them thieves, for lack of a better term. And those are my words, ladies and gentlemen, not Daniel's. Not putting those in his mouth. But talk to me about your time at the UN and how you see its usefulness. And assuming I know a little bit about what your answer is going to be, how do you improve it? How do you make it actually a body for good, as opposed to a organization that, it's another organization, all they care about is driving the Jews into the sea one way or the other anyway?
So how much time do you have?
Okay.
This is one of the classes.
I have much time as you want.
Yeah, right. This is one of the classes I teach as well about the United Nations. I mean, I guess I'll keep it. There's a lot to say, and I fall on the side of I'm not a fan of the United Nations, particularly today. And my time at the UN kind of taught me why, and even more so since October, laid bare for everyone to see. Just real one quick anecdote from that. In November, I think it was, Antonio Guterres, who's the Secretary General of the United Nations. He's the president of the UN, effectively. he gave a speech and he said the October 7th attack did not happen in a vacuum. Quoting, did not happen in a vacuum. Now, what he was referring to was that Hamas must have done this because of something the Israelis did, meaning that they are occupying Gaza or they're preventing Gaza, this and that. And,
the Israelis were breathing. That's what they did.
Well, really, for everyone's edification, Israel has not had a soldier or a civilian or anyone in Gaza since 2005. So the last 19 years, 18 years. But the truth is, it didn't happen in a vacuum. The vacuum, what lacked the vacuum was Hamas wanting to destroy Israel. Also, the United Nations, you have to be clear about what you're talking about. Effectively, the UN, think of it like Congress, and then each state is a different country. So if you had really it's like the Senate, really more than the House of Representatives, like the Senate, where each state has one vote in the General Assembly. And if each state was a democratic state, then you would have a body like the UN General Assembly that'd be democratic, right? Because it'd be reflective of the values of the individual members. But you don't have that because democracy worldwide has been on the decline for the better part of a generation, about 20 or 25 years. You have fewer democracies today than you did, at the end of the Cold War since the turn of the century. So what does that mean for the General Assembly? You'll have countries that will not be favorable to liberal democratic values. So what then do you expect to happen? You'll have countries like China, who is the United States' biggest strategic threat and competitor for this century. You'll have them manipulating the system, working within the rules of the system, but manipulating it to their benefit in ways that you don't see democracies doing. Why? Because we don't think these ways. So with that, you get co-option by these different authoritarian regimes and organizations, and then you get resolutions that consistently focus on one country, and that, lo and behold, is Israel. It's the one country of the Jewish people. Many ways, for most people in many countries around the world, what Israel represents is a sin or a guilt trip from the end of of World War II. Excuse me. Either we were complicit in the largest perpetration of a genocide against any people in the history, and now this is Israel. We have to make up for it, but they're doing it too against the Palestinians. It gets very convoluted. I don't want to get into it, but essentially, you have a UN that's comprised of authoritarian states. And so, what do you expect it to do then? So, what to do about it is. One thing that when Nikki Haley, so I served from 2018 to 2021 under Danny Danone, who's actually returning tomorrow, or I guess it'll be today, August 20th, when it goes live, and Gilad Erdan, who just finished his term the last few years the other day. And Nikki Haley became the U.S. ambassador under the Trump administration, and she said to the Human Rights Council, which is one of the most egregious bodies in this anti-Israel sentiment, saying, listen, you need to either shape up, fix yourself the next year, which they work towards, or we're leaving it. And ultimately, I think the United States needs to think about the UN for the 21st century. The UN was effective, I think, in many ways. First off, the UN voted in favor of the creation of the state of Israel, creation of a Jewish state, actually. And then Israel
they wouldn't do it again if they had the vote.
They wouldn't do it again the week after that happened at all.
Right.
But it was for a time and place that was, looking back, we say it was a good thing in the 1940s. It was actually a UN-led force that went to Korea that the U.S. was a part of in 1950 in the Korean War. But by and large, it's not of the same value, I think, today anymore. And from Israel's perspective, and also America's too, but from Israel's perspective, what is Israel getting? What is the U.S. getting in return on investment to the UN? We give billions of dollars a year. And for what? For anti-U.S. resolutions. And Israel, from its part, it gets UN peacekeeping forces on the northern border, one called UNIFIL, which is an output of the 2006 Second Lebanon War, where the UN Security Council said, okay, we're going to separate the Hezbollah and Israel by a buffer force called UNIFIL, which will be the interim force in Lebanon of UN peacekeepers. They'll keep Hezbollah north and Israel south. Well, Israel stayed south of the border. It didn't want to go north anymore, but Hezbollah came south. And it's because of UNIFIL that Israel's found itself in this situation where Hezbollah is attacking. And in 1967, Nasser expelled UN peacekeepers from the Sinai Peninsula that were there from the previous 9 years since 1956 during that war, and that led to the Six-Day War.
Wow.
So there are instances where the UN has been failing its own mandate. Hillel Neuer of UN Watch, an organization that watches the UN, says, let's measure the UN by the length of its own yardstick. And it fails against that time and again. So the U.S. government, I think, should look very seriously, and particularly you bring up UNRA, of stopping funding for these organizations that not only promote the very least promote anti-U.S. policies, but the very worst are complicit.
Oh, you're being nice about it. They're complicit. Come on.
You're
being diplomatic. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Daniel, but you are being uber diplomatic here when I think the facts on the ground clearly demonstrate that UNRA, which I call them UNRA, maybe I'm mispronouncing the acronym, is complicit in the attacks of October 7th and other terrorist attacks, and complicit in educating the Palestinian youth to hate Jews from a very early age.
So you're 100% right, and I stand by everything you just said. That means outside of UNRWA, there's still organizations in the UN that advance anti-U.S. policies, but UNRWA is one of the worst examples, or the best examples of the worst parts of the UN. So for everyone's understanding, UNRWA is the UN Relief Works Agency. It's a weird name for an organization that provides for Palestinian refugees. Not refugees from the October 7th war, not refugees from any time the last 7 decades, refugees from 1948.
Wait, I have a question for you, just because we're coming up on time. How can you have multiple generations of refugees in one family? Can you explain it? Can you explain that to me?
Yeah. So per the UN, there's 2 different organizations that handle refugees.
It should only be one generation. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right. So there's one that's called the UN High Commission for Refugees, and they define a refugee is that if you, whoever you are, if you left your place of home because of war, because of persecution, et cetera, then you are a refugee. And moreover, we try to resettle you in your new host country, in a third party, or obviously the best situation is repatriate you back home when it's safe to go back. And that's it. If you get settled in a third party country, you are no longer a refugee. However, UNRWA, which predates UNHCR by a few months, but we're not getting into it, they define a refugee very specifically, which if you lived in mandatory Palestine, which is what it was, the area of Israel, present-day Israel, and part of Jordan was called during the interwar years, exactly, by the British. British mandate. And you were living there between 1947 and 1949, very specifically during essentially the Israeli War of Independence. And you had to leave for that war, then you are yourself a refugee. And moreover,
you're a perpetual refugee.
Become refugees as well. Which means whereas UNHCR dwindles the refugee population, UNRWA explodes it. And there are now over 5 million Palestinian refugees, even though only about a few tens of thousands are still alive from that war 75 years ago.
So basically, humor me, right? So 100 years from now, there's still a conflict in the Middle East with Israel at the center of it, right?
Yeah.
So you're telling me that you could be a UN refugee for 150 years, right? And instead of 5 million, there'll be 500 million. Look, by the way, I do have a solution. You can just send them all back where they came from, which would be Jordan. But I don't think that's a really popular opinion.
They don't want them either.
Yeah. Well, first of all, my other question, because we're now getting into the sort of Robert's sort of cop and an attitude here, right? So the other thing people have to explain to me is why it's okay for Egypt to build a wall to keep, the Palestinians from coming into Egypt, but it's not okay for Israel to have a wall. Can somebody explain that to me?
So people don't realize, Kamala Harris says she studied the maps and should see that there's a border with Gaza. That Egypt has a border with Gaza, not just Israel. So people focus on the blockade that Israel's imposed on Gaza since 2007 after Hamas came to power and wanted to destroy Israel. Well, Egypt also shares a border, Gaza also shares a border with Egypt. And it's through that border that Hamas has been able to build up its arsenal and its weapons and its capabilities, which then it perpetrated October 7th. So that's something that, and also when Sisi came to power in 2012, I think it was 2013, one thing he did, because of Mubarak was a president of Egypt for the last 30 years, and then there's a coup, and then Mohammed Morsi, who was a Muslim Brotherhood member, came to power in 2011. He supported Hamas because Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And Sisi came to power, he realized the threat that the Muslim Brotherhood poses to the stability of the Egyptian state and their support to Hamas in Gaza. And he actually flooded tunnels, killed people, destroyed homes, flooded tunnels that Hamas had built into Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula. No one talked about that, obviously, because frankly, if it's not Jews, it ain't news.
Wow.
Yep. Well, and that just to segue this, and Ericka, you'll excuse me jumping in. We do need a time check, but our last show we were talking about, there's a genocide in Africa. There's a genocide going on with Hindus, and nobody talks about it because no Jews, no news, right? It's it's amazing to
Tragic.
me.
It's really
Right. But Ericka, you were going to jump in. I apologize.
Yeah, we got about 7 minutes left.
There you go.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to jump in, but you said a time check. So we got us about 7 minutes before we got to cut it for the radio.
Okay.
But we don't. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, can we talk about domestic politics for a little bit? Right. How do you see this election? I mean, you have your ear to the ground. You are clearly one of the most well-informed people we've ever had on the show. The politics of this, the Biden-Harris, now the Harris-Walz campaign, or Harris passes over Josh Shapiro, the moderate Democratic Jewish governor of Pennsylvania, clearly to pander to what I would call the pro-Hamas vote or lobby in this country. And clearly, when you look at Governor Walz's record, he probably makes Kamala Harris look conservative if you look at his records by comparison. Not that anybody really knows about Kamala Harris, because to me, she's sort of an Obama acolyte, right? I mean, that's sort of the way I would describe her. See, I can say these things on my show. You can't.
I was going to say something really rude right there, but I'm trying to be respectful of Daniel. No, I don't want Daniel to be like,
Daniel,
these guys over here, they're nice and all, but they say wild crap.
Yeah. So how do you see this election playing itself out? I'm not asking you to predict who wins. I'm just asking, how do you see this plays itself out? The choice of Walz, the Rust Belt strategy, the what I call pro-Hamas vote versus what I would call a more moderate wing. I mean, just let's talk a little bit about that before your time is up with us.
Yeah. So I kind of view, sadly, American politics these days, particularly when it comes to elections, you're going after an even smaller slice of the pie, because you have 40% of the electorate is liberal and they're going to vote Democrat. 40% is conservative and they're going to vote Republican. It's the other 15-20% that you really want to obviously win over the independents. So it's really, if President Trump, I think, if he ties Harris to the Biden-Harris administration's legacy, which, if you remember, a lot of the messaging that came out of this administration early on in the administration, the first year, maybe year and a half, I don't think so much recently, has been tie Biden-Harris administration. Never heard that, I think, historically. I'm not a presidential historian, but I don't think you've heard that much in history of administrations. It wasn't
she's with me. We're
it wasn't
together.
the Trump administration. It wasn't the Obama Biden administration. It wasn't the Bush Cheney. It was, anyway. So if he ties,
that's interesting.
Think about it.
You're right.
In some ways, it showed, that Biden was going to be a transitional figure when he came into the office, right? That's what he ran on. He ran on, I'm going to beat Trump. That's my one goal. And I'm going to do that. And then 4 years, and we'll pass it on to Harris or the next generation. Of course, instead of being transitional.
But you're saying the fix was in that early.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
well, no,
yeah.
I think instead he got this idea in his mind by acolytes and sycophants in his inner circle, who said, instead of transitional, Mr. President, you could be transformational. You can be like LBJ, FDR, you could be JRB, just like them. And so that required then running to the left and bringing in the progressives, because you needed to pass things in Congress without Republican votes, because no Republican vote for the Green New Deal. That's or the IRA, the whatever Reduction Act, so the Inflation Reduction Act, of course, which is the opposite.
Yeah.
So by being transformational, he's like, oh, wait a minute, I can be history-making president. And you know what? Why do I want to stop here? It's nice to be president. I'm going to go for another 4 years until, as you said in your monologue, I mean, there was a kind of a coup inside the Democratic Party, not even the party, just leadership in the party, that now replaced Biden with Harris, who Harris was the most unpopular vice president in history. And right alongside there was Biden, until 2 minutes ago, people were looking, well, it's a weak ticket because we got Harris as a VP. Maybe we should replace her. Suddenly she's a president. So I'm not really, I mean, it's if Trump runs a campaign where he says, Harris was right there alongside all of Biden's policies, and particularly on Israel, she promises to be much worse than Biden, I think, because in many ways, Biden, like an old school Democrat, I think he feels it in his kishkas, he feels in his gut being supported for Israel. But when it comes out, it's a different story. Getting back to his belief in how I should de-escalate in the Middle East is actually the escalation. And never forget Robert Gates's comments, his one-time Secretary of Defense, that Biden has
already been on the wrong side of every decision,
every foreign policy decision for 30 years. So you get more.
Why don't you quote him better than I interrupt you? I apologize. Robert Gates, former defense secretary, said what of Joe Biden?
He said that Biden has been on the wrong side of every foreign policy decision for the previous 30 years. He wrote that in his memoir a few years ago. He said that.
Wow.
So that's telling. Kamala Harris, as you mentioned in your question, Rob, is like she's going to be worse. PolitiFact, when she was senator, rated her the most liberal senator for those 2.5, 3 years in the entire U.S. Senate, to the left of Bernie Sanders.
Oh no, they're taking it back now. No, they retracted. Oh no. Oh no. I love the whitewashing or the Kamala washing
this is
of
such
history.
A boondoggle.
It is wild.
This is why I say,
Here's the deal. I was told for sure that Donald Trump was going to ruin democracy and he wasn't going to leave office and the world was going to end and everybody was going to die. And I'm pretty sure the only party I see ruining democracy are the Democrats, or is the Democrat Party. I don't know. Look, Trump, love him or hate him. Republicans didn't just replace their candidate with a person who's never received a single vote on a national level ever.
Right. And I'll say from the Israeli and a foreign policy perspective, there was no war in the Middle East. There was no war there was a war in Europe since 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine, but then it was quiet for 7-8 years until Putin extended that invasion in 2021.
And who was president in 2014? Barack Obama.
Right. And so
who was president after 2020? Joe Biden. Look, we have maintained here that weakness breeds aggression in international politics.
Entirely.
It's really simple. And I would argue, Daniel, that when you're talking about a lot of certainly Iran and the Muslim countries, they have always only respected one thing, and that is the unmitigated show of force. And trying to reason with the zealots, the religious zealots in Iran is you can't, right? I mean, the Western mind doesn't think like that. But I know we've got a couple minutes. I want to again go back to Israel Educator. Where can they find you? Because I know we got to play. We have to do something for Israel Appreciation Day on the way out. I'm so thankful for you to be on the show. The time flew by, but Daniel, where can they find you, Israel Educator? Please tell them again.
Yes, thank you again. theisraeleducator.com. You could type my name, Daniel Flesch, Israel Educator, into Google. I'm not sure what else you'll find, but hopefully you'll find it there too. You can email me at daniel@theisraeleducator.com. And I do classes in person or certainly to reach a broader audience, remote as well.
Yes. And we've got all the links to your socials and everything in the description. So if you're listening, go check it out, click the links. And while you're there, click like on this video, share it with your friends and neighbors so that they can learn what Zionism is. Because you know what? I didn't know what it was either. So I learned something today. So share it. And most importantly, subscribe. That tells the algorithm that we're making good content. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Flesch, thank you so much for being with us today, Daniel. The Israel Educator.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right. We'll see you guys next week.
And if you want to see Daniel again, tune in to Israel Appreciation Day on September 18th, 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Live TV special featuring a lot of good content and people and entertainment, but also featuring Daniel Flesch, the Israeli Educator.